Well, thank you so much for the warm welcome, and I'm very excited to be here today. This is my first trip to Arkansas, and could not think of a better place than here at the Clinton School of Public Service to be able to spend the time. I truly honor and appreciate everything that you are doing here to help create the better world that we all want to live in, and excited to tell you more about the Room to Read story and how we have grown, and really looking forward to more interaction and questions after that to see how this can hopefully be applied maybe to some of the wonderful things that you're doing. First, to start, I always love to start with books, which was really the impetus for Room to Read in our early days. I loved books as a kid. Maybe many of you did as well. One of my favorites was always Dr. Seuss, and Oh, the Places You'll Go, I think probably influenced me more than anything else, given my very global life that I lead now. And I find the words still ring true today. So be sure when you step with great care and great tact, and remember that life's a great balancing act. Just never forget to be dexterous and deft, and never mix up your right foot from your left. Still very valid advice in so many ways. You know, I had parents that read to me every night, like I do with my 5-year-old daughter, no matter where I find myself in the world with her. And that was a timeless tradition that influenced almost everything else that happened in my life after that. Yet, the sad reality of the world is that many people don't have the skills, the basic skills of reading and writing. Imagine if you couldn't access Google, no Kindles, none of those 140-character tweets, no Facebook, not a newspaper, not a book. You couldn't even read a medicine bottle when you needed it. Just imagine what your life would be like if you could not read or write. Imagine going to school and not being able to be given the general foundational skills and being passed from classroom to classroom from year to year without the skills that you need to really access education. Unfortunately, the challenge and the reality of the world is that 793 million people cannot read or write. 793 million people. 98% live in the developing world, probably no shock there, and 2/3 are girls and women. So this issue particularly impacts 50% of our population in a way that is very unfair and unjust. And that's the reality of the world that we live in. Well, for me, that was a reality that I could not accept. I come from a home where my father was a professor. You know, again, everything that we did was just the basic of my entire life was how far could I go in school? What could I do? What could I learn? What could I study? What could I teach? So when I lived in Vietnam, I started out my career in the for-profit world, worked for Goldman Sachs, which in the early 90s was a better job than perhaps it is today, at least more and more respected. And I transitioned out of Goldman to work to Unilever in Vietnam, because I knew I wanted to do something a little bit different than banking, but I still was, not quite ready to take the big deep dive into the nonprofit world. When I lived in Vietnam, it was a really interesting time. It was the mid-90s, just opened up for foreign direct investment, normalization of relations with the Western world after being cut off for about 20 years. And I found myself trying to set up very complex factories by Unilever, expensive European equipment, and trying to understand how we could go from these factories that we needed to implement with people who, at the end of the day, did not have electricity in their own home, never used a phone, much less a computer, or the advanced technologies that we were bringing to deploy in these factories. The gap was so massive, it was overwhelming to think about what you could do. And we had to immediately try to figure out strategies for capacity building, for education, very quickly. And it was very challenging. But fundamentally, what you could see is that in one generation, you could absolutely break the cycle of poverty if you could get people through that gap. And if you get people a solid foundation education, they could be a part of an active marketplace, and economic prosperity in whatever form that would take was absolutely greater than where they started from. And so that was really the origination of the idea around Room to Read, was this idea that education can absolutely change the world, and is, in essence, the key to developing solutions, is having an educated population. Any problem you can think of, and I challenge you to think of a problem where education is not part of the solution. If you're talking about environmental issues, you're talking about public health issues, if you're talking about economic prosperity, political participation, gender equality, any issue, there is an educational solution as a part of that. And really the best thing, and what we've seen work the most in the world, is when you have educated populations that can develop their own solutions and develop their own things that work best locally. And so that was, having worked in this world of expatriates at Unilever, where you'd come into a country and try to, develop and figure out all these solutions, what you really soon realize is you were not going to develop a lot of great solutions. What you really needed to do was listen and watch, and solutions would come to you from very local grassroots ideas. So that's how Room to Read started. We just started listening to communities. We said, we want to help. We care a lot about education. What do we need to do to really fundamentally change what's happening in terms of the developing world educational infrastructure and system? And in our early days, we came up with 4 ideas, all coming from villages and communities that we were working with in our earliest days in Nepal and Vietnam. Libraries. The idea that a child would go to a school, show up, maybe have 4 walls, maybe have a textbook, 1 per child, 1 for every 2 children, and that was it. There's nothing on the walls, there was no supplemental reading material, there was no child-friendly, vibrant learning environment. This is not what's going to keep children in school and spur on creativity and really developing true high-quality educational opportunities. So when Room to Read would come to a village, we totally flipped that around. Vibrant, wonderful, print-rich environments. And we realized we couldn't buy enough books in the local language. So we had to go into actually helping train illustrators and authors and publish our own local language books. And of course, it's all about the teacher. At the end of the day, infrastructure only goes so far. It's about capacity building as well. And so we started working a lot with teachers and understanding how could we bring new professional development opportunities to them. And then finally, what we heard from the communities the most is we don't have enough of our girls aren't able to go to school. So when you go into a classroom and it's a 1-to-5 ratio, and only 1 girl gets that chance, that's not good enough. We needed to create a more even playing field. So we started a girls' education program. And that was the origination of Room to Read. This is a school that I actually built with Unilever as part of a community service outreach program, which was our first library that we established in Room to Read. And that was really an aha moment for me in Vietnam, because it felt like now I was finally doing what I really was my calling, what I was really passionate about. And I could think of, and I still look at this picture, which was taken in 2003, so just a couple years after we started Room to Read, as the most optimistic image, and it's what still motivates me today. I mean, can you think of a happier kid than that face, wanting to go to school every day and get out there and learn, and it's going to have an impact on his life. In fact, I actually think Nelson Mandela said it best. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. I think that's really right. It really is one of the most powerful weapons you can use to change the world. And so that was what Room to Read was all about. World change starts with educated children. Now, of course, we had a lot of big ideas and not a lot of know-how or real clarity on how we were going to get there. So part of what I want to share tonight is some of the lessons that we've learned on what it's taken to actually scale this organization from just a couple of us who are volunteers with big thoughts and goals to actually building an organization that operates in 10 countries, employs over 500 people, and deployed more than $150 million to the issue of international education in about 10, 11 years now. But to do that, I think it's first important sometimes just to take a moment and think about the individual lives. We're going to talk about the scale and the model and the replication, but I first want to just show a video about what the impact this is having, because at the end of the day, behind all those numbers, there's a person, and there's a little person who just wants to dream and have their dreams be able to turn into reality. So I want to share the story of Sufi, who is one of our girls in our girls' education program, going to a school where there's a Room to Read library in Laos.
น้องมี4 คนที่อาศัยอยู่ด้วยกันมีพ่อมีน้องชายน้องสาวแล้วก็น้องเดี๋ยวนี้เพื่อนที่น้องอยู่ปัจจุบันนี้มีลักษณะ มุงด้วยสังกะสีแล้วก็เป็นเทือนตูบหลังน้อยๆอยู่แคมทางถ้าลมพัดมาแห้งมันก็จะออกไปหมดแล้วเพราะมันบ่ทานลมแม่น้องได้ดีป้าน้องแล้วก็ครอบครัวไปหนีไปไทยแล้วก็ได้ปีปลายแล้วยังบ่กลับมาเทื่อแล้วก็บ่ส่งข่าวให้ฮู้อีกแล้วน้องก็ฮู้ได้ว่าเดี๋ยวนี้แม่อยู่ไทยแต่ก็บ่ฮู้ว่าอยู่บ่อนใดแท้ไปปี2009เดือน11หลังจากที่แม่บ่อยู่น้องก็ได้รับภาระหน้าที่ได้เบิ่งน้องได้เบิ่งแย้งดูแลน้องเวลาที่เขาเฮ็ดหยังไปหยังกินหยังก็จะเป็นหน้าที่ของน้องหมดเพราะว่าเขาบ่มีแม่แล้วแม่ก็ได้หนีไปแล้วก็ป้าเฮาอยู่เฮือนแล้วก็ดินแต่ก่อนที่เฮาเคยอยู่แม่ก็พอก็ได้ขายแล้วแต่เงินนี่แม่บ่เคยแบ่งเฮาแล้วก็ได้เอาเงินไปหมดแล้วก็ชีวิตเฮาอยู่ตามลำพังที่ให้น้องมีความสุขได้ดีล่ะได้อยู่กับน้องได้เรียนกับน้องแล้วก็ได้มาเฮียนได้พบหมู่ครูหลายแล้วก็ได้ม่วนไปน้ำกันน้องชื่อว่าสุพีได้อายุ15 ปีน้องมาเฮียนย้อนว่าเพื่อเฮ็ดเอาความรู้ใส่ตนเองและจะเฮ็ดให้จบเพื่อหางานทำน้องได้เข้าเฮียนชั้นประถมจนจบป.5 ปีและได้เข้าโรงเรียนมัธยมปีที่1 ปีและได้เข้ามัธยมปีที่2แล้วก็เรียนบ่จบแล้วได้ออกพอออกเงินไปพอเรียกไปหาเงินช่วยเหลือพ่อแม่และได้ส่งน้องเรียนอีกถ้าจะเข้าโรงเรียนไปก็ย้อนบ่มีเงินจ่ายค่าเรียนจึงได้ออกจากที่น้องได้อยู่เรียน1 ปีแล้วก็ได้มีโครงการช่วยเหลือเขามาช่วยซื้อโครงการลุงชุลีดตอนน้องได้อยู่เรียนน้องก็บ่คิดว่าน้องจะได้มาเรียนอีกครั้งแต่ก็ได้มีความหวังเพราะว่าโครงการลุงชุลีดมาช่วยเหลือไว้น้องก็เลยได้เรียนต่อน้องก็ดีใจเพราะว่าน้องได้มาเรียนอีกครั้งมื้อนี้น้องได้มาโรงเรียนแล้วน้องก็รู้สึกดีใจหลายเพราะว่าได้มาเรียนหนังสือได้พบป้ามุกคุณหลายๆก็ดีใจที่สุดในความรู้สึกของน้องก็ดีใจหลายบ่แม่นคนในประเทศลาวที่ช่วยเหลือน้องแล้วก็คนนอกประเทศอีกน้องก็ขอบใจหลายๆ
So that gives you a sense of the power of what education can do in keeping kids, and especially girls, in school and how important it is. So we talked about the idea, the first lesson, really defining what are you passionate about? How can you really find that thing that drives you to want to create the change in the world? But the hard part is then how do you take that idea and you turn it into a reality? what we found at Room to Read is it was all about, at the end of the day, and this is true in my books for a for-profit or a nonprofit organization, it was all about the people. They were able to engage in your mission, your issue, your organization. And for us, one of the strengths of our model is that from our country directors on through all of our local programming staff, and 83% of Room to Read staff are located in the countries that we work in and are all local nationals. So our belief is that by finding social visionaries for educational change in their own country that understand the context that they operate in and investing in them allows us to find a contextualized, appropriate model. And the stories of the people that are invested in this work are incredible. You know, they're creating on the ground real change. Stories like Con Call here. He grew up in the time right after the genocide in Cambodia. His entire family was massacred. He spent his youth hiding out in the fields, in the countryside. He snuck back into Phnom Penh, and he used to sneak into school to get his education. Now, fast forward, he went through obviously a lot of hardship in his youth, but eventually started to work with nonprofits as the country started to be regained, nonprofits that were really about rebuilding the country. First worked for the UN as they started to rebuild the school system. Most of the schools were all ruined or used as military outposts. Most of the teachers were all killed under the Khmer Rouge. And for him, his biggest passion and place where he wants to spend his time is in rebuilding the educational system for the future of the Cambodian children. You know, I spent this summer 6 days in a van all over Cambodia seeing some of our work there with Call and his team. And to see him enter into a community and talk about this, you know, very rural. I mean, some of these, you know, we were taking boats to tractors to walking, you know, 6 hours to get to one village. To see him inspire people in Cambodia was unbelievable. It has a lot less to do with any of us who are funding it or running it, and a lot more to do with the power of the Con Calls out there that are able to make this change happen on the ground. And it's about bucking the system. Sunisha here in pink is our country director for Room to Read India, and established Room to Read India as our first country director in 2003. And I've been in numerous situations with her where you're literally like this, sitting on the ground, convincing, you know, the elders of the community, oftentimes the men of the community, about the value of what we're trying to do. You know, it's still, even in a place like India, unusual for a woman to travel on her own and to go to work in rural areas, to take buses, to take trains. So she's set up a whole system from our staff, who are a lot of them women, to be able to do this work together and to go in pairs and to find ways to work in these communities and to get out there in the very deep parts of India to be able to make this change happen. These are the people that inspire me. They're the ones that make it happen. There's no model, there's no roadmap that you can predict for exactly how a country is going to develop, but it's being able to invest in the right kind of people that is able to make it happen. And the third lesson is really about taking those risks and knowing that you're going to find setbacks. I think one of the key things with Room to Read is that in many ways, you know, we were outside the system no matter who we were. We were foreigners in countries that we were trying to work in. We were for-profit professionals at the beginning working in the nonprofit space. We were operations people working in education. No matter where we were outside, if you will, outsiders. But in a way, I think that also allowed us a fresh perspective, looking back on it now. And I think we didn't know what we didn't know, which was okay, because it allowed us to innovate and to just use the best knowledge we could, reach out to people who were subject matter experts, and try to come up with new ideas. I kind of think of it as the Buddhist principle of a beginner's mind, a fresh, unbiased approach to problem solving. And that's a fundamental that we've tried to always use throughout Room to Read, to really be a learning organization, to create a space where entrepreneurship is great and is appreciated. And it's okay to try things. It's okay to fail, hopefully as long as you learn from them and you try it a different way next time. And really creating that environment and creating an organization that valued that was incredibly important to us in our beginning days, and still now a core value that drives the organization. And a lot of times you got doors closed in your face. When we set up Room to Read Laos in 2005, it's a very difficult country to operate in. Very few nonprofit organizations, communist government, not certain that they want to sort of, you know, allow local organizations that are outside of the government. So we spent weeks and weeks trying to navigate this complex scene. And finally, I just got so frustrated, I said, you know what, I'm just going to go into the Ministry of Education and just see if I can meet the minister, because I've been here now for weeks. I'm tired of it. I just want an answer of why we can't work in this country. And I said, you know, I had an intern with me, actually, that had been there for even longer than I was. And we said, let's just see who stops us. Let's just keep going. And we walked in and we got through the guards and just kept saying, oh, we've got an appointment with the minister. Got through the front desk, got through various arms of people kind of pointing us down the hallway. And finally, we got in the lobby, or the sitting room of the minister himself, and he walked out and he said, who are you? And we said, we're Room to Read, and we want to work in Lao. And he was like, do you have an appointment with me? I said, I do now. And within 2 days, after months of negotiations and trying to figure out how to get to him, we got our license. You know, that's just a very simple and short story. Just say never stop trying. Never, never, never give up, because there will be many, many doors slammed in your face with any new idea, with any innovations. On a bigger scale, one of the innovations we had was in our local language publishing program. Our first monitoring study in 2003 showed that the greatest need in the countries we were operating in at the time was for books in the local languages from the students and the teachers themselves. Now we said, well, that's great, let's go buy everything we can. Well, unfortunately, in Nepal, that only was 15 titles in the entire country that were children's books, really good quality children's books. So we wrote the Skoll Foundation, who's a great organization, Jeff Skoll, one of the first people at eBay who set up a foundation to support social entrepreneurism, and said, you know, we need help. This is unacceptable. We have to find a way to break this conundrum. You know, we need to be able to get books in local language. So we got a grant to start a local language publishing program. And now we've printed 553 original titles in 23 languages and distributed 5.7 million copies in just about 8 years. And the thing that's the most amazing is that we train local authors and illustrators and build the capacity of others, because writing for children is an art form, and it's a skill to write really good children's books. So we're helping to create, you know, the next Dr. Seuss of the developing world, or many, many Dr. Seusses. And the stories are amazing. Like this story, An Amazing World, where you can learn about the geography of India through the different kinds of hats. It's a great children's book. Or this story called While Swinging, which won the Best Children's Book Award in Lao, about a girl who falls off her swing and her friends convince her to get back on, and with determination, she learns to keep trying. You know, a very age-old theme, but written in a local way. We were actually very proud last month that we won the UNESCO's 2011 Confucius Literacy Prize, biggest award we've ever won in our history for our local language publishing program. And it's now being often referred to, if you will, as a secret sauce in Room to Read's model, as a way to really create sustainable, real change in the dynamic around education and children learning to read and write. So it's very exciting to see where this program has come in just a few years. You know, the best part about my job is being able to go visit hundreds of libraries when I'm traveling in the countries that Room to Read works in. And I always spend time sitting with the children, talking with them, and I get the most, you know, fabulous questions. You know, Nepal, landlocked state. What is the landlocked country? What does the ocean taste like? You know, Khmer, children will ask me, what does snow feel like? Very hot country, Cambodia, right? Just, you know, children will ask in Zambia, what is it like to live in a house with a stove and running water? You know, just through books, they've learned about these ideas and these concepts. They don't even know what to do with them. It's books open the minds of children and eyes to the world. They're very powerful tools to be used. And we're very excited that we've now opened over 12,000 libraries. Last year in Room to Read's network, once every 4 hours, you know, on average, a library was opening, which is really exciting that we've been able to find a model and really bring it to scale and replicate it. And that's really the fourth lesson, which is, in my opinion, when you start to have a great idea, don't hide it. Don't just do it once or twice, but find a way to scale it, to replicate it. If it's working, make sure there's more of it out there. But it's also really important to keep it very locally relevant, so it doesn't just become a cookie-cutter solution. As I mentioned, we've now impacted over the lives of 5 million children in 10 countries and deployed more than $150 million to this issue in just our 10.5 years of operating. One of the things that I think is great about this model that we've developed is how we're creating a global movement around this issue of international education, the importance of it. And we do that through a chapter volunteer network that operates now in more than 25 countries and over 53 cities. And these volunteers who throw fundraising events, awareness events, reach out to their local communities, more than 5,000 people not on Room to Read's payroll, volunteers, raise a third of our annual operating budget. They raised over $12 million for us last year. It's phenomenal. It's something that is amazing to see, and it's all about decentralizing it and letting the creativity of it happen. You know, Japan, Tokyo, beers for books, that's what they do. Who knew? It's very popular. Japanese love to drink beer, and they love to support Room to Read, and it works. Girls' nights out. Calgary has this fantastic event that's the talk of the town, and it's this great girls' night out event that they do. I mean, each place comes up with their own ideas and their own ways, and it's really great to build that momentum. But it's also been really important to find ways to do that in the countries that we're in. How can we engage the communities and create this global movement in the countries we're operating in, too? This is one of my favorite stories when I was in Zambia early this year that they told me, where we work, as I said, in these very rural communities, and the staff started to see all these Zam beef, a very local beef company. And the trucks would go to Lusaka, the capital, filled with beef, but they would come back basically empty. And our staff said, we're trying to get all this furniture and books out to these schools, and it's very expensive. The infrastructure is horrible in Zambia. It's very expensive to rent vehicles and manpower to do this. So they approached Zambeef, and Zambeef was thrilled. They, of course, wanted to help the communities that they were in. So free of charge, they now deliver our books and our furniture to our libraries in the communities that they're already going to collect the beef. And it's a great way for them to invest in their community, and it's a great way for us to be efficient and cost-effective. This is how a library gets delivered in Bangladesh. Now, I probably wouldn't want to be that guy, but this really works at a very local level, and it's finding those local solutions that our staff is able to do that allows us to ensure that 83 cents on every dollar goes directly to our programs, as opposed to the other operational sides of the organization. And it's finding, and it's always keeping that idea of pushing things down, decision-making, authority down to the local level, that they can come up with these creative ideas. That's really allowed us to scale. So the fifth and final lesson for us has really been about remaining open to refining our vision. Sometimes it's hard. You think, oh, this is starting to work. We're starting to, get a little press. We're excited that people are investing in us. We're opening new countries. People want to work with Room to Read. But, at the end of the day, we knew that there were still, and still are, really important ways that we can improve on the model. And it's making sure that you're always asking that question, what can we be doing better? We started to notice, and really it was somewhat a hard pill to swallow, that what was happening was that we had these great libraries, but they weren't being utilized enough. You'd walk into a Room to Read library and you'd look at the checkout list. There weren't that many students checking out books, and the students that weren't checking them out that regularly. And so we started to ask, why not? We've gone through all this, very logistical, challenging ways. We've changed teachers. We've got very simple book systems, checkout, empowered teachers that know how to, engage children. Why is this not happening? Why are books not being read more? And what we heard from the schools and the teachers themselves was that we don't know how to teach reading and writing. We just have such archaic systems, and we're not really sure that we're doing a great job. And we have a lot of students that are not reading at grade appropriate levels, and they're just getting passed on. And the reason why children start dropping out in the developing world by 4th, 5th, 6th grade in the developing world is because they can't keep up with the subject level knowledge. They didn't have a solid foundation in reading and writing. And with our girls' education program, we started hearing stories as well about how things weren't working. We started, with a program that was very much about, beyond the Room to Read girls' education scholarship program. These great backpacks that were oversized that they could grow into, the brand on it. Well, guess what? Who wants to be branded the kid on the scholarship program? Kind of a basic idea, huh? We never even thought about it. They totally ostracized these girls like, hi, I'm the poor child that needs a scholarship when I go to school. And we just thought we were trying to provide materials and ways to support them. So when we heard that feedback, we're like, obviously opposite impact of what we wanted to have. And what we started to hear was really working was not just about keeping girls in schools, but was really also about creating these opportunities for women and girls to come together outside of school. A safe place where they could talk about life skills that all of us need. Problem solving, communication skills, how to overcome challenges that they face with their parents, with their family, with their communities. Really basic things that they didn't have a safe place to talk about. And so we started developing, field exposure visits and summer camp and other ways for these girls to come together. And now we've really evolved our model and refined that vision of a girls' education program. It's definitely still about keeping girls in school through the end of secondary school. At the end of the day, every year that a girl stays in school through the 12th grade, her earning potential goes up by 15%. Family health and nutrition improves, infant mortality goes down. The number one determinant of whether a child will grow up literate is if there's a literate mother in the household. I mean, no matter what you look at, investing in girls is smart economics and it's great development work. So we want to keep the girls in school longer, we want to have those results. But what we found was important was not just about keeping girls in school and helping to provide the material support, but we also found it was really important to build on this idea of these life skills that were extracurricular workshops that we started doing with the girls on a regular basis. We've been doing this now for several years, and this was a girl, Roxana, in Bangladesh, a Muslim area that was very hard to start working in. We started working in 2008. 200 girls on the program, very remote in the chore areas, the deltas that flood all the time in Bangladesh. Girls weren't going to school hardly at all, definitely, and they started dropping out by secondary school. And now this community has gotten really excited, not only about keeping the girls in school, but about these workshops where the girls are starting to talk about what they want in their life. And one of the activities, as you see here, is no one's ever asked them, what do they want? And for them to stand up and say, I want, is a revolutionary concept. And we thought, this could be a little bit much maybe for what is obviously a traditional community. And we did have some resistance at the beginning. But what was really amazing was that in 2010, this area flooded. And we'd been working there for about 18 months. We started to see that more girls were coming, that the community was accepting us, but we didn't really know. Out of the 200 girls, about 5 families' houses got wiped away entirely. Most of the, subsistence level farmers, most of the agricultural activities were deeply impacted by the floods. And the next week, our Bangladesh program officer for the girls' education went and said, I'm just going to go because I'm going to help rebuild. They're probably rebuilding their homes, and who knows, I just want to help. She showed up, and they had already built the temporary shelter to house the girls' education weekly workshop in. And the whole community came out and said, we all prioritized this as being the first thing that we were going to do as a community together because we didn't want the girls to miss a single week in the program. And that just floored us. So this change can happen. And it happens because there's also another core part of the program, the mentors and role models that we use. This is Bindi. Bindi was about ready to drop out of school, and everyone thought she was a failure. She didn't do great in school. Her test scores were always at the bottom. She had a lot of difficulties at home. Father was an alcoholic, mother was struggling with many kids. Well, part of Room Tree's program, when you get onto the program, is you get connected with a role model or a mentor. Within 1 year, someone just cared about Bindi, just asked, how can I help? Just cared what she did, that she showed up to school. She's now ranked number 2 in her class. So it doesn't, these things work. These things are sometimes the easiest solutions, but it's being able to implement them holistically and being able to really listen to what's needed that's allowed us to reach this kind of impact. And now we're doing that in our literacy program too. We're addressing that issue of why are kids not learning. So we've designed a literacy pilot where we're actually going and working with the government now, creating a lot of supplemental materials to be used in the classroom, helping to train the teachers on how do you teach reading and writing better in grades 1 and 2, creating little classroom libraries, because of course little first graders and second graders have a hard time someone's going to libraries, so bringing the books closer to them, and bringing facilitators into the classroom to help model new methodologies and pedagogy for the teachers. And this is our literacy program now. Now it's not just about the library, but it's about creating a whole integrated approach to this idea of children graduating primary school with both the skills and the habit of reading. The habit we did a lot of, but the skills, was a bigger issue, and we had to tackle and start really working on the instruction piece. And that has allowed us a much more holistic approach to literacy too. And it's really listening and refining that vision that I think has allowed us to continue to innovate, continue to hopefully provide some ideas for how to really address these massive issues of education in the developing countries that we work in. So just to end with a personal anecdote, I took my daughter for the last 2 summers with me traveling as a way to try to balance life and work. Luckily, I have a mother, former Peace Corps worker, who doesn't mind playing granny nanny and joining me so that we can all, as 3 traveling generations, go out and experience Room to Read through my family's eyes. And you know, when I asked Julia, I said, you know, we've been traveling for weeks now in Vietnam, Cambodia, and, you know, visiting these different schools. You know, what do you think about this, you know, compared to what, for you, what has this experience been like? And she was like, what do you mean, Mom? She's like, I don't know. The thing I liked the most was just going to that library. You know, he was reading his books to his stuffed animals just like I do. It's just like home. There's nothing else, just like home. And I thought, you go to a private school in San Francisco. It's just like home. And of course, I, you know, through the eyes of a 5-year-old, thought about this and thought, wow, that's an interesting perspective. And then I realized, you know what, we are creating an even playing field. For her, there's not the difference. She's going to these great, fabulous schools, and she's seeing the same thing that she sees at home. And I thought, you know, this is maybe working. Maybe we're creating that opportunity for every child, no matter where they were born, no matter what circumstances they were born into, to reach their full potential in life through the ability to access a high-quality education. And so with that, I'll end with my favorite Dr. Seuss again. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And that's really, I think, a very powerful statement for what we've tried to live by at Room to Read. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Will you take a few questions?
Please, yes.
Now you can see why I've been trying to get Room to Read here and Erin here for a long, long time. This is a fabulous program that has inspired a lot of people. All right, we have time for some questions. Yes, sir. Right back here.
Sure, I got a couple. That was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Well, what do you associate these libraries with? Is it with a school? Is it with a church? Is it with a village? And the second question was, how do you? Well, maybe I shouldn't presume that you do, but do you separate religion from your organization? If so, how do you?
Yes, no, 2 great points. We work in all government public schools, so we do connect with the school. And we do that because it's what we have found to be the most scalable way to impact what we do. Because at the end of the day, governments, at least for primary and secondary education, really are the largest player in any of the countries that we're working in for delivering educational services. And so to reach the most underserved, the most rural, and the communities of most need, going through the government system allows us that access. And it also allows us a sustainability mechanism. We are a secular organization, so we don't have any religious affiliation, but I think the reason why we are so focused on the government system is because we need to find a system that, you know, hopefully will be able to be a going concern and continue to raise money, but if we don't, for any reason, we really want to be able to say that we've built capacity within a system that can hopefully live beyond just Room to Read's investment. So with the library, for example, we invest for 3 years. We're training the whole way and monitoring and helping give feedback to the schools of what they can be doing better. But then we end our formal funding, and we help with the idea that it gets institutionalized at the school and that they have to take it on. And that's an understanding from day one of any school that we work in, is that they know that this is about their school library, not a Room to Read library. And so I think that government piece is really critical, particularly in primary education, secondary education, for that sustainability.
Hillary, right here.
Hi, my name is Hillary. I'm a Clinton School student. Thank you so much for being here. My question is kind of 2-pronged. When you're approaching these governments, do you ever feel like you have to build a case or convince them that educating girls is the right way to go in terms of bringing up their economy and bringing up, you know, the country, the community as a whole? And are there any governments that you've had a really hard time? I know you talked about Lao, I believe, getting in, but that you've tried to get into and you just haven't been able to because of the mindset of what you're trying to do.
You know, I think yes, yes, and yes. I mean, the challenge with governments are that they are incredibly hard to work with. They're incredibly bureaucratic. They're not necessarily open to innovation. They don't necessarily want to honestly know what's working or not working. So there's a lot of complexities. And actually, every country, I would say, that we work in, to different degrees and in different ways, but every country we work in, it is a challenge for us. On the end of the day, though, we haven't found a better solution of where else to work. And so I think, for us, every government does state, and kind of the answer to your first question then is that every government does state that this is an issue. You know, they're all part of the Millennium Development Goals, Education for All goals. They have targets they're trying to reach in terms of children in school, in terms of gender parity. So on the surface, they're like, great, room to read can be a solution to that. So at a very, you know, sort of macro level, they're generally supportive. What happens, though, on the ground, as you get down to the state or province level, the district level, the commune or village level, can be very different. And that's where we have found is necessary, is for us to actually sort of develop criteria that we look at for if we'll take a school on. Now this is kind of can be somewhat controversial in development, you know, thinking in terms of how you do it. I mean, there's a lot of different approaches to development, and I think this is actually an area that, you know, continues and needs to be studied. But what we have found is that if we're trying to work with a school that doesn't have leadership that's excited by this, the ability to kind of co-invest, at least in terms of time, some donated space, some materials, some volunteer, you know, different aspects of getting involved in a project, it's just, you're just, you know, swimming upstream, right? You're just going against the current, and it's very hard to create the change. We would much rather, with our limited resources, and we're still a very small player in this greater field compared to, you know, governments, multilateral organizations, large organizations like, you know, UNICEF or Save the Children, we're, you know, a drop in the bucket. With our resources, we find, you know, let's at least work at a place where they want us and they want to try to, you know, to have some sense of ownership and be a catalyst for change within their own school. The gender question, I think, gets at both the school and community level. Schools are generally pretty easy to work with. They want, again, they understand the challenge and they want to create that more even playing field. But it's oftentimes the community that where we have to work and we have to understand. And you know, we can talk to communities for a couple of years and we'll say, look, if there's not support here for us to do it, you know, we'll go somewhere else. Because again, we have, you know, we only have so many places we can work, and you know, we're not going to try to convince and change minds, but this is what we do, and we'd love to partner with you if there's a way to make that happen.
Question right here.
Hello, my name is Vina. I'm also a Clinton School student. Thank you so much for being here. This was a really fantastic presentation. My question is about how you find the local people to work with you. Do you find community leaders? Do you partner with local organizations? I worked with an NGO in India that builds reading rooms and libraries in government schools, but we were a very small NGO. We didn't have a lot of resources. So how, you know, do you look for organizations that are kind of already doing that sort of work, or how do you identify the community members who will support you? Yeah.
So we have, we hire staff as well as partner a lot with local NGOs. We have now about just over 500 staff worldwide. Again, about 83% of them in the countries we work in. India is actually our largest operation. We have now about 90 plus staff, all Indians working in India in 9 different states. But we actually do in India and in many countries that do have a vibrant local nonprofit sector, is we partner with them, because those 90 people can't actually do all the work that we're doing in India. So we're working through a lot of nonprofits that is a train-the-trainer model. So maybe they're a very local NGO that's doing an agricultural project, maybe it's a youth project, maybe it's something in the schools, maybe not, and we'll help train them on the model so that they can go and facilitate and monitor the schools and implement the libraries, and it'll be a co-partnership model. We try not to get into the idea of just funding local NGOs, though. We want them to have some skin in the game, too, so that we're really building each other's strengths. They often have much more resources in terms of know-how and community relations and all the things that they can bring to the table, and we'll have more of the technical piece. But it's important that we both kind of jointly come together with our own staff and some of shared cost sharing, so that we both feel that this is a project that we're jointly implementing. Because we don't want it to just become like a funding sort of process, which I think, obviously resources are necessary, but at the end of the day, sometimes I think you also need a real passion, a real dedication for creating this change, and that needs to be demonstrated, as well.
Yes, Trish.
Hi, my name is Trish Flanagan. Thanks so much for being here. I'm a Clinton School student as well, and I'm interested in, I've worked on the Mexican border and in Honduras for a couple of years, mostly with education programs for girls and women, and that's, as a student here, my desire. And I think I was just talking to Nikolai, I said, I need to talk to her one-on-one. He was like, yeah, so is everyone else, so get in line. But my question to you is, one of the things that I kind of, as a surprise to me when I was sort of doing that work and learning about it, and really realizing what you've mentioned so eloquently, which is, it's just smart. It's smart development. I mean, the woman is the foundation of so many things. So, but being reminded by men and women that you have to incorporate the boys and the families and changing the whole mindset. Do you guys see that in the communities that you're working with, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, that's actually another kind of on this theme of refining your vision. We've gotten a lot of feedback on, what about the boys? You can't change attitudes around gender. Gender does not equal female. Gender is male and female. And you can't change, ideas around this without engaging with both sides of the equation. So we actually do now are developing more programming and have just started in a few of our countries piloting it around including boys in some of our life skills workshops on certain topics. So if the topic is around communication, it can be very helpful because one, first of all, it's a skill that everybody needs, but then it's also important to be able to communicate not just in a safe space with other girls, but with your brothers, with your father, with your other community members. And so it's been really good for what we've seen, initially is it's been really good to find opportunities when we can work together with boys and girls. Now I will say our literacy program, which is 60% of our work is and funding goes into literacy, and 40% of the program funding is in girls. So the majority of it is primary school level for boys and girls, no distinction. So I think that there's a little bit on those. We kind of have two different pillars now around gender equality and the literacy piece. But I think it's a really good point, and I think it's one that there's a lot now more focus on women's and girls' issues, which I think is great, I think is necessary, but I think it's also not ostracizing kind of the group or creating too much of a distinction. It's at the end of the day, it's all of us. I mean, I often say, I don't know really a father who doesn't want to see a better life for their daughter. So you have to also include them in the conversation and have that, that open mind to their ideas too.
Got a question right here.
What methods are you using to determine if a student is progressing beyond reading and getting into reading comprehension?
Great question. So we have a wonderful grant from the Gates Foundation that has allowed us to invest a lot more in our evaluations. We've been doing a lot of monitoring, sort of regular checking on the projects and various ways in terms of determining, how many libraries are hours, library is open, or how many books are checked out, how many activities are happening. But as we've now invested in this space of literacy instruction and these pilots that we've been doing in the last couple of years around teaching reading and writing, we've had to get into much more sophistication around measuring student-level outcomes, student-level results. So we now are doing baseline, before Room to Read starts working in that classroom, studies of where children's reading skills are, and then taking it at the end of year one and at the end of year two to see how students are progressing. The biggest challenge that we have found in this space is that there are not, in most of the countries that we were in, there are not government, sort of tested and approved assessments around really what is the right level in these local languages for grade appropriate reading. Like, what should a child be reading at in grade 1 or in grade 2? In a lot of developed countries, we have that. We know how many words per minute. We know what kind of fluency. We know what kind of comprehension skills. You can start, testing, being able to talk about a story or, all those things. But in a lot of the countries that we're working in, we're actually using what is EGRA, which is an early grade reading assessment tool that's been developed by a lot of funding from the World Bank, and adding some different components to it, one of them being a comprehension component. Because it's still pretty new, new science, if you will, in the sense that these tools are somewhat untested. And so a lot of what we'll be doing is actually, quite frankly, testing the tool as well as the students in terms of whether we can help define where students should be and whether we can really measure that. So it's a huge area for, watch this space for us to really see how to better look at the student level income outcomes.
Yes, question right here.
Your passion for your work really comes through. Thank you again for being here. Would you speak a little bit more about your international or U.S. governance framework? I think you mentioned you use a chapter volunteer network in 25 countries and 53 cities, and then perhaps you've built libraries in 10 countries, and we're talking about hiring in-country staff. So what would your governance framework look like?
Governance, is that what you said? So in the 10 countries in Asia and Africa that we work in, we are either a branch office, if you will, if we're allowed to set up, it depends on the laws of the country, which means that our US Board of Directors would oversee, and it would be sort of like a subsidiary of Room to Read, or we are a legally separate entity, which allows us to set up, but ultimately we staff that with a majority of boards members being staff at the US office. The reason why we do that is if there's a wonderful case study that if you're really interested in going deep into the subject of Save the Children. Save the Children UK, Save the Children Norway, Save the Children Finland, Save the Children US, keep on going, you see the complexity, all started setting up as legal entities. They now have a multi-million-dollar project called the Alliance, which is about bringing them all back together to play nicely. So it's a really, for international NGOs, it's a really complex issue, this issue of governance. Luckily, I had advice from people at Oxfam and Amnesty and Save the Children early on around 2001 for Room to Read not to go down that route and to be able to, and as a legal structure, try to keep it consolidated worldwide. Now in the countries that we're fundraising in, it gets even more complicated because in some countries we've set up in order for tax benefits of individual donations, et cetera, like you would see here in the US, a 501c3 kind of equivalent. Other countries don't have that we're fundraising in, like Japan doesn't really even have that kind of a structure. Other countries like Australia don't allow that. Everything has to go through the AusAid, the Australian equivalent to USAID. So massive complications in terms of how to do that. But there's always, where there's a will, there's a way. There's always a way to work out the system and figure it out. And what is amazing is that oftentimes these volunteers that I'm talking about in these places, they're lawyers, they're bankers, they're, members of great organizations that donate pro bono and, advise us on how to make it work.
Yes, this will be our final question.
Okay. Room to Read builds libraries. It puts books in those libraries. It staffs those libraries. Can you kind of give us an idea of what the pie chart looks like as to where your budget goes? How big is your budget? Last question would be, who controls what books, the subjects of the books that goes into those libraries?
So just to be clear, we don't actually staff the libraries with full-time. We, within the government system, in the kind of that challenge grant model that we really believe is important for there to be a co-investment, we require the schools, the public schools, to dedicate teacher time to be trained as librarians and to help staff the libraries ongoing. We'll provide kind of facilitators or monitors that will come maybe weekly or monthly or quarterly. If it's a really good library, they don't come as much. If it's one that's kind of rated, we have a grading system. It's rated C, D, on the watch list. We'll go more frequently and try to build up their capacity. So we relied a lot on the school actually for the space, for the sort of ongoing maintenance, if you will. A lot of our funding goes into the infrastructure at first, furniture and books and all of that goes into capacity building, a lot of training, and ongoing training for a full 3-year period, as I was saying. So there's we're trying to invest in the hardware and the software, but we're trying at the same time get the school to institutionalize it. Our annual operating budget this year is about $38.3 million. When we started in the early days, we're scaled quite rapidly for the first 7-8 years. It's a lot easier, law of large numbers. It's a lot easier to go from 1 to 2 million than it is to go from 38 million and keep adding. So we've slowed down a little bit in terms of our our growth, but we have found even in this very tough economic environment the last few years that I think the effectiveness of our model speaks well. I think the diversification, we're now raising 46% of our funding outside of the US because of this chapter model, so the diversification of our funding, and the fact that we're really able to measure and talk about the impact that we're having, and it's a very local solution that people, they like the fact that we hire local staff, that we have our local language publishing, all of these things are very powerful tools. We've been able to continue to grow despite, even the greater economic environment. So the subjects, yeah. So it actually varies a lot it's kind of one of those government questions. In a country like Nepal, which has been pretty much under civil war for the entire time we've been working there, they are very hands-off. So there isn't a whole lot of oversight. In a country like India, for example, you have to get approval at the state level where they check the book list and they approve it. And we've actually had, arguments where communities will come out. We've had book burnings, they're like, no, these books are in. And then we're like, no, we got the state, even though this community itself, you may not like these books, the state did approve it at the state level, and you have to negotiate all the various district to state level, kind of thing. So it's a big issue because you are talking about, obviously, opening people's minds to new ideas and topics. At the end of the day, for the most part, that's not a huge issue because we do, the benefit of having country staff that have strong government relationships is, we're for the most part talking about really supplementary reading material for primary age students. So once it's approved, it generally goes through pretty smoothly.
Let's give Erin a wonderful round of applause. And I hope that each of you that have questions or would like to visit with her personally, there will be time, so please come do so. Thank you all for being here. Have a safe trip home.
Thank you so much.